Coming to you from UBN Studios in Burbank, California. You're listening to the Unsugarcoated Podcast with your host, Aalia and Lanius.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Unsugarcoated with Aalia. I'm so happy that you could join us today. Well, lots is going on in the world today. And I want to remind people that we do not try to be political on this particular podcast. That's not what I'm here to do. I do want to, focus on society and culture and perspectives that help us bridge gaps, make our communities better, stronger, everyone included. I don't see a political preference. I see people. Just want you to know that and keep that in consideration with all of my guests and every topic that I come to you guys with. So while we're all dealing with the myriad of issues in America, like a global pandemic, now our nation has erupted into nationwide protests after George Floyd, a person of color, was apprehended and died while an officer kneeled on his neck in broad daylight, killing the man. People are frustrated and demanding change, and unfortunately, while those individuals and communities are trying to relay a message, there are those who mire the message, those individuals who want to insert violence, destruction, and capitalize on that opportunity. Damage is happening when police exert effort in trying to disperse the crowds. And for me, when I drove around my neighborhood, which consists of Beverly Hills and West Hollywood area, it pained me to see so much devastation. I'm not going to lie, if you hear my voice trembling a little bit right now, it's because this is a sensitive topic. It's very passionate to me. This is real. This is my home too. So on that note, I want to share something with you that I thought of while I was driving around, and I want you to consider it. That racism that fuels police brutality is an insidious disease. Not all police officers are racists, but the issue, let's stick with that. So on the thread of disease, while driving around my neighborhood, observing the damage, it caused me to reflect on my personal experience of what it's like to get rid of a disease that is a threat to your existence as a 3-time cancer survivor. When you're diagnosed with cancer, you're given a set of options. Boils down to pretty much 2. Do nothing, you will eventually die from this disease. And to do something means intervention. It won't be easy, it won't be painless or without scars, and it won't be cheap. If you've had the pleasure of taking a chemotherapy cocktail route like I have, you're told you're going to have to allow this toxic medicine inside your body. While there, it's going to wreak havoc, kill both healthy and cancer cells. We are warned about our hair falling out, skin issues, mouth sores, fingernails that will come off, and that healthy organs can become compromised as part of the process. That's right, the medicine that's trying to save you is also potentially going to kill you. But hopefully, after your body is leveled, it can be built back up again. And your cancer-free body can get on the road to recovery of a long, healthy life. It's a gamble, but one we take. We take that freaking chemo regardless. My friends have had to make painful decisions to have their breasts, lungs, arms, or whatever other body part they have to lose just to have a chance on odds that we can beat this thing. You're trying to be one that survives it. My point. Unfortunately, the reality of getting rid of a disease is a process, and it's not always a pretty one. If you see racism as a disease, perhaps you will feel like me, where I'm saddened to see this destruction and chaos, but I'm also not going to let it distract me from the focus. And for the record, I've owned retail stores that have been broken into, robbed, and vandalized. It's not fun, and all I can say is thank goodness for insurance. The problem that we are trying to address today or discuss is police brutality and how racism impacts it. We've seen it, some of us have lived it, and too many people have died from it. People who hide behind a badge, bringing dishonor to the purpose of what law enforcement is intended to be, should be held accountable. I hated cancer and every ill-feeling medicine or difficult surgery I had to go through to get it out. But guess what? It was all worth it, and I'd do it again, just so I can breathe. So with that, I've invited 2 incredible guests, actually. One of them I know for a very, very long time, and I'm so honored that he would be here. They're going to help me with this conversation on law enforcement. They best represent it as being people who have served for them and can talk on police brutality and how training plays into that. So let's get to it. First here we have Samuel Dordulian, is a highly regarded litigator with over 18 years of legal experience and the president and owner of Dordulian Law Group in Glendale, California. Previously, as a deputy district attorney for Los Angeles County, Mr. Dordulian worked as a sex crimes prosecutor. In his almost 2 decades of service, he has passionately convicted numerous pedophiles, stalkers, arsonists, and murderers. From his days of acting as a prosecutor protecting the rights of victims to currently protecting the rights of injured workers, he has dedicated his life to making a significant difference in the lives of his clients. Since the inception of Dordulian Law Group in 2008, he has already obtained tens of millions of dollars in settlements for injured workers and individuals who were once ignored and rejected by the system. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Dordulian. Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Good, very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Next, we have Detective Castillo. For nearly 30 years, he has been a fixture in the Los Angeles community, serving as a respected law enforcement official. During the early years of his esteemed tenure with the LAPD, Detective Castillo served among the specialized team of detectives at the Robbery Homicide Division. In 1999, he was promoted to the rank of detective at the Newton Sex Crimes Division. Over the next 20 years, Castillo devoted his life to helping survivors of sexual abuse, particularly children, obtain justice against their attackers. A highly regarded member of LAPD's Sexually Exploited Child Unit, his contributions have helped close cases and secure justice for hundreds of sexual abuse survivors in Los Angeles. Following his recent retirement from the LAPD, Mr. Castillo joined Dordulian Law Group as chief investigator, where he plays a pivotal role in the process of securing justice for our clients, applying his decades of law enforcement experience and unique investigative expertise to important cases. Ladies and gentlemen, Detective Moses Castillo.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you to you both so much for being here. We have a lot going on in society right now, and I've given a pretty good bio. Pardon me from my this is a tough day, I'm not going to lie. I feel very stressed. I think we're all witnessing a lot of stuff, and it impacts us. And I can't hide that. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, not to be, whatever. Mr. Dordulian, tell me a bit about, as a former deputy DA in Los Angeles, how you feel today.
Kind of like you, I feel stressed, to be honest, with everything that we have going on, starting the year with the pandemic, and now we're adding all of the stress with what's happening in our society, with this the murder that occurred at the hands of a police officer, and the resulting riots that we're seeing and the protests that we're seeing. So stress, I think, is a pretty good adjective to describe what we're all feeling. Now we're just left with trying to figure out how to deal with it and what to do with it, and maybe try to figure out some solutions to what we're seeing out there with a lot of people calling for change. And I think that's what all of us are trying to figure out right now.
Sure. Detective Castillo, I've known you for many years. You've been serving this city since you were, how old were you when you joined the force? Like 18?
Well, we have to be 21.
21, okay, sorry.
Academy, yes.
But you're a young man. Your entire life, you've devoted it. As an LAPD officer, how do you feel today?
Well, I just retired.
Well, yes, as a former
Yeah,
student.
in March.
May, that's right.
In March. So it actually, it's really sad. I'm heartbroken. And oftentimes I feel like we haven't learned as a society, as a, in general, because back in 1992, the LA riots broke out just for that same reason, very similar circumstances, where 4 officers were acquitted for a beating that committed against Rodney King.
Correct.
And after that, all hell broke loose. And I still remember my training officer wrote down on my journal, because back then I was a rookie, and my training officer is supposed to write a daily journal into what happened that day. And he wrote, urban warfare broke out today, and the hell broke loose in the city of Los Angeles, and Castillo kept his cool. and when I saw the images on TV play out again, all the images I saw back then were buildings were on fire throughout the city,
right?
And it was just chaos, and officers were being shot at and calling for help. It was awful, and then to see this again, I just can't believe it. I can't believe that, and this is a lot worse this time, because now we have social media, we have the internet, instant images, are playing out throughout the country. Back then, it was only isolated to Los Angeles, but now we're dealing with urban warfare throughout the country.
Right. Well, and, I have to say, there's a lot of people that I've seen really have a hard time distinguishing the looters from peaceful protesters, and I feel like that's one thing that makes all of this even look more confusing. I want to go back to what you said about the LA riots. So, but 2 decades ago, I remember it. I witnessed it as well from afar. Of course, I was actually still living. I was a kid. No, I was still in Northern California, and I was not a kid because you and I are around the same age. But the reality was, I'm not going to lie, it seemed far removed to me at that time, because it didn't really affect my neighborhood. But this is something that so many people from Philadelphia, New York, all these different states, all these different neighborhoods, and it does make you sad because that is kind of the point. Why has there not been more change? And what can we do to really finally get that going? I know that it's a cry of frustration, and we went through this with Rodney King, and we should be so much farther than we are now. How do you think unconscious bias plays a role in police work?
Well, I think it does exist, that whether we want to accept it or not, some police officers bring their biases with them when they come to work. This is why I could say that LAPD for many years has really focused on bias policing and identifying it, what it is, so that we don't do it. And we actually have a anti-bias police unit where if somebody makes any allegation of bias policing, it gets investigated by a special unit from our internal affairs. So we have taken steps to address that problem.
Sure.
And also it goes down to training. And so, again, I can only speak for LAPD in the sense of what I know their training to be. And they have done a very good job of training us to de-escalate the use of force. If we could talk to somebody into handcuffs, it's a lot better than rushing in there using force.
Right.
So we're taught to use distance, time, resources, communication skills, different non-lethal weapons in order to obtain. And they went as far as even creating we've always had a mental evaluation unit, and maybe in the history of the department, they probably had no more than maybe 6 officers at a time. But now I believe it's well over 30 officers that work there around the clock to respond to situations where we're dealing with a mentally ill individual and know how to deal with them. They have special training and background. They work with a mental health professional that's a civilian, whether they're a psychologist or a mental health worker.
Sure.
So all those things were to help minimize these type of outcomes. And what happened to George Floyd is evil. It's murder. It should have never happened. And we don't condone it in any way.
And well, I got to say, it does seem that with the world of social media and everybody has a camera now, I feel that there are those checks and balances within our system, right? I mean, I went to law school too. I always tell people when I went to law school, the first thing I learned that justice had nothing to do with what was right and what was wrong. Not trying to, it's the truth that, so there's those failures in the system. I think that, if you run a big machinery factory and you put in the machines and you say, they work good now, let them go, and you don't come back and check those and make sure that those same machines are still working efficiently, doing what they're supposed to be doing, then you have problems, right? How do you feel our police system can better make sure that you're being trained to do it, then why aren't they doing it? Because with social media, we can see it all the time. We see officers all the time. And we do see them, then to be fair, we see the reverse. We see them take the right move. I've seen officers hug people. I've seen just the most amazing, compassionate things come out of an officer. And then I've also seen the most ugly, mean, that's not right. And how do you prevent that?
One of the things I've seen in our department do is they'll do audits right after a radio call. So let's say, for instance, an officer shows up to the scene and deals with a situation and somebody goes to jail. So they'll go and interview all the parties involved to see how the officers' actions were and their demeanor, and were they professional, were they compassionate. And they'll talk to all the parties involved and audit this. It's like
Sure.
a customer service.
Is that where body cams came into play too?
Absolutely, yes. Well, body cams were there because, again, we want to build the trust for the police, for the community. And so there was a lack of trust, so they felt that if we carried our body cams, it would do 2 things. It would tell our story, but number 2, it would actually prevent officers from maybe keeping them honest, if you will,
Sure.
because they know they're being watched,
Right.
so they're going to do their job, the way they should, and that's why I was so surprised. It's like you have people filming you, you have your body camera.
Yeah.
What's going through your mind?
Right. Because, I mean, and that's probably perplexes you, which, I do want to ask about the criminal system and how, people of color are viewed and put that to you. But I do want to say that. Do you feel ever like as a police officer knowing that you're, this is going to sound, but you're one of the good guys. You know that there's things that get done that shouldn't. We all, the blue code, you protect your officers, right? We watched a video, and we've seen it many times, where other officers just stand by and don't say anything. They don't do anything. They're not the conscious counterpart. What do you, how do you feel that gets addressed?
Well, again, it goes back to, because if going back to the scenario of auditing the service, if we start seeing red flags, then we go and we address it. Hey, Officer so-and-so, this is what we learned. This is what we saw the video, your body cam, your actions, they're not up to par.
Sure.
So, you'll get, some, punitive action, whether it's, a suspension, whether it's a write-up, whether, whatever it is. And that is the intent, to then correct the behavior.
Sure.
But if we do that constantly, that's one way. But to me, it goes back to developing partnerships within the community, and we could talk about that as well as we go on.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, I want to kind of follow up on something you said earlier. You said that there have been examples, and you've seen it yourself, with officers hugging people, doing the right thing. But I think sometimes we forget, and we don't highlight that as often. If we were to show that and reinforce that, that is the model that the officers need to comply with. Mm-hmm. I think that we have a tendency to highlight the negative, always.
Right.
But don't ever usually highlight the positives that we've seen throughout the years.
Sure.
And if we were to do that a little bit more often, the officers would see that this is a reinforcement, this is the behavior that we do want to have with the community.
Right.
Maybe there would be some more change towards that positive behavior, because I think the constant negative upon the officers, and I think Moses can speak to this, that a lot of the officers just feel that they're just getting beaten upon all the time, constantly, that they can never do anything right, because there aren't enough stories about the officers who are doing the right things. And then there are officers out there. Unfortunately, there are a lot of negative and some bad apples as well, and including the one that led to the riots that we're seeing right now.
I mean, I agree with you. It is a two-way street. And I'm not saying that people do not do things for police officers. I'm not suggesting we all go out and start baking cupcakes and taking cookies down there to try and, but at the same token, you have a point. We have, the communication goes both ways. We have to show the officers, because I do want, there's two things, and I don't want to forget it, but I want to, because we can tend to squirrel with these, but I will say with the criminal. So you have the recent also situation with Ahmaud Arbery, who was viciously killed. And then it took so long for prosecutorial justice to come along, and really kind of felt for many people only after social media and it got, in the airwaves. Speaking as a former deputy, DA, and knowing that side of the aisle, what are your thoughts there?
So several things I think go through the minds of the prosecutors who are charged to look at this case and determine what charges to file, including the one that, the officer that killed George Floyd. There's a lot of people, I was listening to the news yesterday, and there was a lot of people that were really upset that it wasn't first-degree murder versus third-degree murder. So what are some of the things that lead the prosecutor to making those decisions? Well, number one, they want to make sure that they get it right. As we've seen throughout history, it's very, very difficult to convict rogue officers. It's very difficult to convict police officers from these type of events, and we've seen it with the Rodney King verdicts. So you want to make sure you do get the right. You want to look at every piece of evidence and re-review it and make sure you have a solid case. But the other thing I think that factored into the decision made for them to charge third-degree murder versus first-degree murder, they also want to make sure that they can win. If you overcharge the case and you lose the case, I think the chaos that we would see would be far eclipse what we're seeing today. So you want to make sure you're charging something that you're pretty confident you will prevail at. And I think that's another factor that the prosecutors had in mind when they chose what they chose versus doing something like first degree, which would be a very difficult thing to prove in a court of law. I think a lot of people, since the general public doesn't know the nuances between the various degrees of murder,
Sure.
they want to feel that you're getting charged with, they see it as murder, so it's got to be first degree. But there are quite a bit of legal nuances, and the prosecutors want to make sure they pick one that they can prove in a court of law. And I think those factors, unless it's being explained to them, may not resonate a lot with the public, and it may lead to the discord that we're hearing from a lot of people who don't really understand the differences between the various degrees.
Yes, I agree. I will say, I mean, I've seen a lot of cases though too, where if you've been, and we're not here to defend. Like that's one thing I want the audience to remember. We're having the conversation. We can't answer for every single thing. We can't answer. That's why we make a good conversation, because we're hearing all sides. We're not going to sit here and yell at each other and tell each other right or whatever. It's not about that. And of course, there are people who get upset when you defend police officers or the legal system as if that means you're pitted against the other side. Right. That's not the case. You can have a perspective and support all and in between. I support officers who do their job to protect and serve the community. I respect the judges and officials and things that carry out the legal system in criminal prosecutorial cases like that. But we have to also understand that I've seen men who have killed their wife in a crime of passion, and then they get charged higher than that. So I mean, it's like if you look at this, even if it was a passion, or not passion in a love sense, but him not being rational, him not thinking, going to what you're just saying, you still for a lot of people could have been at least murder too, or something that was a little bit less. I know what you're saying, but I want to ask you though, because you said something that made me think, and I wonder, how many officers do you think are standing out there right now that have the baton in their hand, that have a shield up, and they don't want to be there?
Well, actually, they don't want to be in the circumstances where they're in now. They'd rather be out there helping, serving. I'll give you an example. This morning, I know of a young girl, 10 years old, who was raped by her stepdad and molested by her grandfather. And the detectives that would have normally been servicing her case, they can't, because they're out there in the front lines dealing with these kind of protests and criminal activity where the city's burning down. And that's what I'm talking about. People don't realize that when we signed up to become police officers, we signed up to be the difference, to be the change that we want to be. So like I grew up in East Los Angeles with a single mom, and I was the baby of the family, 2 older sisters. No dad, no father. So, and right across the street was the gang house, and I remember diving to the floor when I would hear the shots being fired, because it was a drive-by and I was afraid of getting hit. So I get it. I know what it's like to live in the neighborhood and in the hood and live through that. So I could have labeled myself as a victim all along, and be a victim and no change. I stay stuck where I'm at. But I decided that when I grew up, I want to be a difference. I became a police officer because I saw the local deputy sheriff in my neighborhood. He came in looking sharp. He looked like a American Clark Kent in a deputy uniform. And I saw his interaction with us. And so when we signed up, we want to be the difference. So it's not just a job. It's not just a career. It's actually a calling where we want to make a difference in somebody's life, because most of the time when we meet folks, we meet them in their darkest hour. We meet them when something really bad has happened to them. And now we can't even do that. We can't focus on helping people because we're out there trying to defend our city from burning down, and it's hell broken.
Well, for that I blame really the looters and the people who take, that are, like I've said, in because there is that difference. There are people. I mean, yesterday I watched a completely peaceful protest get bombarded by officers. I've seen video, so I'm not trying to dispute you, because I love that you say that. And I look at you, knowing you used to coach my son's soccer team, knowing that you did sign up for that, Detective Castillo. I know you did. But I think there's a lot of people out there that know that there's also people who sign up for their belief system, which is, and I have to say this because you are a Latino from East Los Angeles. How have you felt when you know another officer profiles a person and just thinks the worst of them because they happen to be Latino or they happen to be black? At the same token, how do you stay objective when you're in a role where you see people of all races and all colors do evil things every day, evil and bad things and criminal conduct. How do you stay objective?
You know, those are all tough situations. And when you have to know that my primary concern as a detective was to advocate for my victims, and I was their voice. So if I wanted justice, I treated my suspect with respect, because if I treat him with respect and a little decency and non-judgmental, I'll get more out of him than I would, because ultimately, if I get what I want, if I get what I need from him, such as a evidence or a confession or whatever, then at the end of the day, I'm actually serving her.
Right.
And I always be careful when I say, even when we do a press conference that we announce an arrest or whatever, I'm always careful not to give up too much information, because I want to protect his rights, that he's innocent to proven guilty in a court of law. Because ultimately, if by doing that, by preserving his rights, or I'm saying he, but it could be a she as well, protecting his rights as a criminal, at the end of the day, I'm protecting her rights to get justice, because if I violate his rights, he'll walk.
Right.
And I can't do that.
Right.
I gotta follow the law. I gotta follow the department policy, because if I stay within the law, within the policy, I'm respecting his rights.
Right.
But at the same time, more importantly, I'm respecting her rights for justice, and that's the ultimate goal: is to feel good about, at the end of the day, that I did my job. I did it. Yeah, maybe, I had a guy who killed and murdered a 3-year-old little girl by stabbing her multiple times in front of her parents.
Right. I remember that case.
And the human side of me, I probably wanted to take him out.
Right.
But I know I couldn't.
Right.
And so I did everything. I was super nice to him. I brought him water. I talked to him. He confessed. He gave me the story, and now he's in prison for life. But trust me, and I had to convince the parents, don't go after him. When we go to court, don't jump over the rail there and try to get him, because it's not worth it. And, so those emotions exist.
Right.
So you just have to rely on your training and your experience and being professional. And ultimately, I don't want to lose my job because of this guy doing something evil, and 2 wrongs don't make it a right. So, and some officers forget that. And then I think in that case, Samuel as a prosecutor, he's seen that side.
If we could capture one solution to all of this problem, if we could capture the passion that Moses just spoke with about what it's like for him to decide to be a police officer, if we can find more Moseses out there, I don't think we would have the issues that we have
Agreed.
Right now. So maybe part of the solution is finding more officers like him and doing a little bit better job in the selection process of finding more officers like him. Because I think you're right. There are some officers who come in with a completely different agenda. I actually remember in college, there was this guy who was part of a business fraternity I was in. He was a very interesting character. He was a very scary character. He used to sleep with weapons underneath his pillow and talk about weapons all the time. And he applied to become an LA County Sheriff's deputy. And I remember, besides myself and another person in the business fraternity, we got a call. They were doing a background check on him. And we told the truth. We spoke what we see in him. We told him he's very dangerous. One day he may hurt somebody. He may kill somebody. A couple of years later, I found out he was on the force. Apparently, no matter what we said, what we did, it didn't seem to matter. The selection process, they still needed, I guess, bodies, and they picked him. We're not getting enough officers like Moses.
Right.
And if there is a way of figuring out how to find more officers like that who have a true passion for serving the community, clearly we would solve this problem. It's just, how do you get there? How do you do a better selection process?
Well, maybe let people like him pick. No.
Well, you know what? Well, it's to his point, to add on to that, if they take the current officers that were involved in this particular incident and do a complete biopsy of their personnel package, their background package when they were hired and they were going through the hiring process, go back and take a look to see if they missed any red flags. Because if they did, learn from that and tighten up on those processes. Because I think he's exactly right. Sometimes we, just because they don't have a felony conviction or any arrest doesn't mean they're suited to be in law enforcement.
Sure. No, absolutely not. Everybody is definitely not suited to be a law officer. And I think that, and I mean, it does have to be said, because I was at one point married to an Air Force, a man in the Air Force, excuse me. And I remember one time reading his notes from boot camp, and it was talking about training and how, I want to ask you, what is the training involved for a police department? Because I know for military, it's you're dealing with an enemy. You have to remain, you kind of have to you have to be desensitized, right? Now, you're dealing with civilians that do criminal conduct at times, or you're investigating if they have or not, and you're keeping law and order. But there are times when I respect the fact that you go into dangerous situations with very dangerous people. You worked in sex crimes, and you, like you shared, I know you've told me you've looked the devil in the eye more than once. I think it is hard for people to understand that daily you're dealing with, a good situation where someone calms down, and then you deal with someone who doesn't, and they are a threat. I can only imagine what that's like, to be quite honest. I don't even know how to even really follow that up with a question in the sense. Because that's why I did ask earlier, how do you remain objective? Are you guys required as officers to go back every so often and get like evaluations? Is that part of it?
There's nothing that goes back that we are reevaluated. However, we do have access to our department psychologist as a resource. And sometimes based on those interactions with our psychologist, sometimes they'll make some modifications to our work. Maybe let's take a time out and maybe just work behind the desk for a while, or take some time off to decompress, depending what it is. So that one thing I do appreciate that we have resources, not only among our department psychologists, but we train officers and our civilian staff to be peer support. So they become, quote unquote, little psychologists, if you will, mini psychologists, just to paint the picture. So somebody's trained to facilitate somebody venting, talking, and if they see some signs, because a lot of times, officers turn to alcohol to escape the pain.
Yes. And
so that could add to the stresses of this job, to your performance. So we look for those signs, and when we see that, intervene and take some action.
And maybe that's kind of part of the point too. That's why I'm saying maybe part of the solution is also, look, first of all, we know macho men don't like to go to therapy. So I don't know, just making it available might not be enough. Making it part of the process, right? Because how can you go through so much rigorous mental stress, effort? Your life is getting put on the line. I respect those things. How could you not have that regular check-in? Because if it's only getting caught when it's broken, then you're, being proactive is, any success trainer will tell you being proactive is key. So, I just throw that out there in one sense with regards to what you see happening right now. So I'm going to actually ask a legal question. I cannot lie. There's a part of me after watching yesterday's events unfold in front of the White House. I wanted to go out and protest, not just to support the cause, but also the message that we do have the right to peacefully protest something, and that personally, as an American citizen, I am upset with what I'm seeing. I respect that if you do not, and I keep using that word respect because it is important, if we have a society without a police in play, it would be chaos. All this looting that people are complaining about, that's nothing if we didn't have a police force. We have to have civilization, and we have to have structure. If we don't respect that, then we're missing a big piece of this. So, bridging the gap. If I do want to go out and protest right now, though, if I want to be peaceful, what are the risks? Because people are getting arrested. People, what could I be looking at if I'm breaking curfew and I'm protesting, even if it's peacefully?
Well, you are subject to arrest, and you're subject to being charged, and you're probably going to possibly have a misdemeanor on your record. But I think that what you're getting at is our right to protest. The problem is right now, people don't seem to feel like they have that right, but I think part of that problem is because of the looters. If you took that part out, then we wouldn't have the curfews that they're instituting right now. They would allow the people to be sitting peacefully and demonstrating and holding up the signs. Because I think when the officers see that, that's normally permitted, except when you have the violence and the destruction and the looting, now you pass these curfew laws to try to eliminate that. But as a result of that, those peaceful protesters lose their voice.
Right.
So that's the problem, is they're trying to curtail the destruction, the violence, and the looting, but you're also now taking away a little bit of people's voice. So that, and I think you started off the segment, and we do need to separate those who are trying to protest and make and send a message and have a message for what's wrong in society. They should be allowed to speak. But we need to separate them from what we're seeing from those who intend to have violence and destruction and looting. they're not making a political statement. They're
Right.
not trying to advance a cause or help society or come to some sort of solution. They're after some personal gain. Once we can separate those two, maybe we'll be able to give a little bit greater voice to those who are properly protesting and wanting to affect a change in society. But our problems are the looters and anybody who supports that.
Counter, because there are people who want they want the people at home to look at the people making a protest and say, oh, that's why the police have to be, strong with them. That's why there's police brutality, because you're behaving like this, right?
Right.
I have a question for you. You currently now have this amazing, legal group of people, and you've got someone like Detective Castillo, and I know anyone who can go to your website can see, what you're doing and how you're empowering people and getting settlements for people who have not been served justice. If George Floyd's family came to you tomorrow and said, "We'd like for you to represent our family," what would be your take on that? What would you as an attorney feel? I mean,
I would absolutely happily serve them, and because there was an absolute wrong that occurred to him. He was murdered. He was murdered at the hands of a police officer who, whether intentional, reckless, negligent behavior, caused the death of another man. And clearly it was wrong, and I'd be happy to serve the family and to try to get them some sense of justice. Fortunately, in the civil world, the only sense of justice is getting monetary compensation. But sometimes with that, we can affect change. If there's enough hits to the city and there's enough damage to their pocketbooks, then they will be forced to make a change because they don't keep wanting to get hit with the monetary compensations. So sometimes the civil justice can serve to affect some level of change. So I would be happy to and honored to serve them.
And let me ask you, what do you feel like for a family like that? I mean, like you said, they've lost. So is there only recourse than the financial? I mean, you really have nothing else, right? If someone in your family dies in the hands of law enforcement, I'm really speaking specifically to, because then thank you for making that clarification earlier when I brought up Ahmaud Arbery. I know he wasn't killed by a police officer. However, I feel it is everything that we're having, there's just been a succession of events, right? And one including recently where a woman, Amy Cooper in New York, was in New York Central Park with her dog, and she had it off the leash. And so Christian Cooper, a gentleman, said, please, and I'm sure you guys saw the video. And so she gets on the phone and starts hysterically calling. I brought this up, and I will bring it up because what she did, and so that's kind of a problem too with society, I feel. The people who feel that they can manipulate officers. Right? Like, because that's a real thing. Help me. She knew what she was doing, and she knew that she could call about a black person, and that what do you think her goal with that that call was?
I wish we would have heard the 911 operator on the other side ask or hear whatever questions she was asking, because I would imagine the 911 operator, well, what do you mean threatened? Because she didn't actually give any acts that he was doing other than just generalizing. He threatened me.
Sure.
Send the police now. So I would have loved to hear the 911 operator question.
But to be clear, she would have had no choice, though, but to send officers, correct?
What I wanted to add with that is if she would have lied and said he did A, B, or C, man, that would have been really bad. But it goes to show you that we as officers, we're responding to a scene. We really don't know what we got until we investigate.
Sure.
So, initially we may come on board, we arrive on scene, and place cuffs on people just to stabilize the situation. But then once we know what's going on, the cuffs may come off if we knew, okay, this person was not involved or this person didn't do what the evidence shows.
Right.
But initially, we want people to comply with our requests. So we're asking you to put your hands up or put your hands behind your pocket or behind your back. Do it, because by not doing it, then it puts our defenses up, and then from there it could go sideways.
And if she had made specific statements that we know is false because of the video, one thing we don't see so much, and as a former prosecutor, I never really had the opportunity to do it either, we don't charge people with making false police reports as often as we probably should to discourage this type of conduct. So she did make a generalized statement of threat, and that's very hard to say that she was making a false report for some odd reason. Maybe she did feel threatened subjectively. But if she said very specific acts occurred that did not occur, and we know from the video that the gentleman was filming, then maybe there should be some considerations that we should be a little bit more proactive of charging those people who are making these false reports.
Yeah. Well, and it's ironic because, to be honest, if they had shown up and they had hurt him without cause, and something like what happened with George Floyd would have happened to her or to him, she would probably also be the same person moaning and complaining about a protest, right? But yet she's the one who's
Who
calling the
Yeah.
police department and taking advantage of them. If you really care for our police force, don't waste their time, Karen, or whoever these names are, by the way. I don't even know. I can't keep up. Whoever they, I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm being honest. Don't be that person who maliciously and falsely calls police officers away from what they actually are trying to do in our community, which is protect and serve us. How do you feel that the dynamic between police and civilians is when I feel that you do work not for us, like I'm your boss, but you work for us, but quite often I've been pulled over by a cop and made to feel like I'm the one in control here and I don't really care what you think or say, and what do you how I know you're not here to answer for every police officer ever. And I have the good fortune of knowing how good of a man you are, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, and you're soft, but I know that there's times that you've had to be really tough on crime. How do you feel officers could better balance that dynamic that we know you're in charge because you're the law and order, but yet you do serve us?
I think I think we're at a point where police officers need to change their mindset, if you will, as it relates to having a partnership with the community. So, for instance, I am not afraid to give my cell phone number to the victims that I serve because I want them to know that I'm accessible to them at any time. But not everybody would do that because they'll say, "Oh, I'm afraid. What if they find out where I live? And what if it gets, safety reasons, I'm not going to do that."
Right.
Well, I'm not worried about that because then my partnership with them goes a long way so that when I do need them, they're there for me when I need them. And so in the community, LAPD has a good model where they have senior lead officers, and they're our liaison between the police department and the community. Senior lead officers are responsible to be in the community, interact with the business owners and leaders in the area, or even regular citizen, and get to know the community so that if the community has concerns or problems in their area, they know who they could call.
Right.
And that's an awesome, because then they bridge. So then that senior lead officer says, "Hey, neighbor so-and-so has all this trash or all this, graffiti or whatever it is." Well, then the officer, his job is to get the resources to maybe get the trash company to come out and clean it up, and get the graffiti removal team to come out and address those issues. Mm-hmm. Just to give you an example, or if there's street racing or if there's some vice activity, that liaison officer then knows where to call within the department to get resources to deal with those issues of life, quality of life issues. So if we could build up more of senior lead officers, I think that would be good. Again, and maybe create committees within the community. So a few members of the community come on board as a committee, and so that we could have ongoing dialogue. I think that's the key to ongoing dialogue. And if we have that, I think they understand us, and we understand them, and then we have the same goal of wanting to live in a place where it's safe and secure and in peace. And that's what we want. That's all we want. We want to live in peace.
I agree. And I think that you are very fortunate to have been a child and looked up to a police officer and said, "That's a man I want to grow up and be like," right? But I want to definitely make sure that the kids who have seen officers do things, and maybe those little kids, if they're black, brown, even white, to look up and say, I feel that they're tarnishing an image that should be held in such esteem. Right. And I want the little boy to not look up to the officers and say, "Okay, I don't want to grow up and be like you." Obviously, South LA, East LA, there's.
That reminds me, I have a story where I spoke to a group of maybe 40 college students from a nearby college in Los Angeles maybe a couple years ago. And after that, one of the students wrote me a letter. And in that letter, he begins to say that he grew up in South Los Angeles with the idea to hate police officers. His father taught him to hate police officers and taught him not to trust police officers.
Right.
And then he said, after hearing you speak and hearing your experiences in the police department, it changed me completely. Now I want to be a police officer.
Right.
So, I'm no Martin Luther King or I'm no Cesar Chavez, But you know what I want to be? I want to be that person that finds the next Martin Luther King,
Right.
the next Cesar Chavez, because there's a lot of people out there that can make a difference, and it's really, the change starts with the individual. If they really want change, it begins with themselves first, and then I remember several years ago in Dallas, Chief Brown, now he's the superintendent in the Chicago Police Department, but back then when he was the chief of police in Dallas, his city was under attack and his officers were killed, and he was tired, and he said, "Hey, we're hiring. Go get in line, pick up an application." And that's my challenge, is if you really want to make a difference, join the police department, join the probation department, be a prosecutor, be an attorney, be a judge, go to school, get your education. But to come out here and create chaos and break laws, that's not going to do it.
Right. No, I mean, I would agree. It's not, there's just so much more. I mean, those young kids that are doing it thinking, oh, I'm getting away with stuff, I'm getting some Nikes, they're demolishing a message that they will need when they grow up. Like, Absolutely. They may not. I mean, it's funny when I do think about certain things. Like, and by the way, for the record, yes, I do not even actually the protesting in principle. I get it with dealing with freaking coronavirus, you guys. Like, this is just not the time. It could not. I mean, I know you can't tell people like this is the time. I know, but I mean, for people's safe and health and all of that, I have that layer of concern. But the truth of the matter is, we're not going to get anywhere by fighting with each other. I would like to see programs that do involve more community with police officers, not just I know that police officers will go to your classroom when you're a kid and they'll do that, but maybe there should be more integration so that I know that there's a boundary. There has to be a boundary. It's like I have kids, right? And I always tell them there's a line. You can't cross this line. I'm your friend, but I'm also your parent. And first, I'm your parent. So you get that. You're a coach. You've coached. You keep them close, but then you also you keep this boundary so that there's respect, right? I feel like maybe more programs that really do integrate our community and officers, maybe they can, because if people are seen for who they are, maybe some officers will not react so harshly. Because I will say this, and I know people say, I hate it when someone says, well, good people do bad things and bad things happen to good people. And it does happen very often that on your worst day, you get caught, especially nowadays, right? Like, it's just, people should understand that nowadays it does only take one thing to completely change everyone's view of you. And if you're not a racist, then don't act like one, is my simple advice on that. I want to say thank you so much for your time. Please tell our audience where they can actually get in touch with you. Look, if I have a personal injury case or I've been wronged, I mean, what is your favorite type of case to represent, if you don't mind me asking?
We really focus and specialize in cases involving sexual assault. Since I used to be a prosecutor in the sex crimes unit, that's how I met Moses. He was the detective on several of my sex crimes cases. And we're taking what we've learned and the years of experience that we have prosecuting and putting people away, and now applying to the civil court and civil justice. So that's the type of cases that we really focus on and specialize in.
How does it feel for you to be like on the other side?
It's interesting because after I left the DA's office, it was kind of a little bit of a letdown on the civil side. I wasn't taking cases involving sexual assault. I was just doing general personal injury litigation, which there are some cases where you still feel passionately about. But these type of cases,
right.
That passion came back. So now that we're doing these type of cases again, especially together, investigating these type of cases and giving some sense of justice to those who've been so severely wronged, as children in particular, it really is rewarding and it feels good and feels like what we used to do back in the days together. So it feels good.
I love that. And so please, for the listening audience, please spell out the name of your website so people can go and find you, ask you questions, support what you're doing.
Sure, thank you. And it's D as in David, Law Group, DLAWGROUP, dlawgroup.com.
You both, Detective Castillo, can you tell our audience your handle for Instagram? Because you've been on the news, you've represented many cases, and usually quite tragic. When I was looking yesterday to find photos of you in action, there was one, I guess recently in was it March or May? March, a little girl was killed, or a young boy was killed crossing the school in South LA. And so when you got out of sex crimes, you ended up going over to traffic and dealing with major cases, hit and runs. And then you have since retired in the last couple of months. How can people support you, and what is your handle on Instagram?
Instagram, it's Sir Detective Moses, or you can find me at detectivemoses.com. Or also the D-Law Group website as well. And I'm making myself available. If anybody is interested in actually becoming a police officer and you're from out of state or from out of the area, LAPD does have a special program or expedited testing process for those that live out of town. So joinlapd.com is that website. But reach me. You'll find me on social media and send me a message, and I'll be more than happy to help you, mentor you through that process. I actually made that tweet not too long ago, and I actually had 2 people respond, and I'm looking forward to helping those 2 folks, learn more about the process and what it takes to become a police officer. But I think that's the beginning. That's the beginning of, we can't change the whole world, but if we could change one person at a time, it goes a long way. It really does, and you just never know the impact you're going to have in someone's life.
Absolutely. Agreed. Well, thank you both so much for being here
Thank you for
today.
having us.
Everyone, please stay safe, and thank you so much for letting us be unsugarcoated. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.